Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. Today, the Taliban complete 3 months of their takeover of Kabul. 3 months, the Americans left Afghanistan on a platter for them. Also 3 months, almost 3 months, since an American drone strike killed 10 members of an Afghan family, including 7 children. The family is still seeking justice. The US military has said that a series of errors led to this attack. This attack was supposed to have targeted an Islamic State suicide bomber posing a threat to US-led troops at the Kabul airport. It hit civilians. And this is not an exception. This has become a bit of a pattern. Americans striking the wrong targets, Americans striking civilians. In this case, they had to own up. In some others, they've been successfully managed to hide. A case has come out from Syria, a case from 2019, where an American airstrike ended up killing more than 60 civilians. It's a war crime. Some reports say that Americans have conducted almost 100,000 such attacks in the last 20 years, killing almost 48,000 civilians. Who is going to hold America accountable for these war crimes? That's the question we'll ask on Gravitas tonight. We'll discuss how the American military gets away with such heinous acts. We begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
India reopens its borders to foreign tourists after 20 months as COVID-19 cases decline across the country amid a rise in vaccinations. India has now allowed quarantine-free entry to fully vaccinated travelers from 99 countries. Tourists will be required to monitor their health status for 14 days after arrival. An explosion outside a hospital in Liverpool has now been declared a terror incident by the police.
Motivation for this incident is yet to be understood. Given all the circumstances, it has been declared a terrorist incident.
Earlier, a taxi exploded near the entrance, killing the passenger and injuring the driver. 4 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act, while the motive remains unclear. 2 people have been injured after an IED exploded in Kabul's Kot-e-Sangi area. The apparent target was a Taliban Rangers patrol vehicle. Both the injured are said to be out of danger. This comes after the Taliban conducted a military parade in Kabul, displaying American-made armored vehicles and Russian helicopters. The European Union will step up sanctions against Belarus as the migration crisis deepens along its border with Poland.
Today we are going to approve a new package of sanctions against Belarusian people responsible for what's happening in the country.
EU foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to agree on further measures against Belarus. This as nearly 4,000 people are stranded at the Belarus-Poland border in freezing forest. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Libya's former leader Muammar Gaddafi, has registered as a presidential candidate in the upcoming election in December. Saif al-Islam is wanted by the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has accused Azerbaijan's troops of violating the border between the two nations and has sacked his defense minister. This comes as both sides accused each other of opening fire at their border near the contentious region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Austria imposes a lockdown on unvaccinated people amid a surge in coronavirus cases across Europe. The Austrian government said that about 2 million people in the country were now allowed to leave their homes, only for a limited number of reasons like work or shopping for essentials. American journalist Danny Fenster has been released from a Myanmar prison 3 days after being sentenced to 11 years for allegedly breaching immigration and terrorism laws. Officials say that Fenster will return home soon via Qatar. 2016 European champions Portugal have missed out on direct qualification for the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar after a shock 2-1 defeat to Serbia. Portugal needed only a point and were on course despite Dusan Tadic cancelling out Renato Sanchez's second-minute opener. But Aleksandar Mitrovic scored a 90th minute winner to send Serbia to the World Cup and relegate Portugal to a 12-team playoff tournament in March. Twenty-time Grand Slam champion Roger Federer is set to miss the Australian Open in January due to injury. Federer's coach Ivan Lubicic has said that the 40-year-old is still recovering from the knee surgery he underwent after losing in the Wimbledon quarter-finals. However, Lubicic says Federer hopes to return to tournament action at some point and is not yet contemplating retirement.
Our cover story tonight is about America's vicious legacy in West Africa. How it trampled upon international rules to commit human rights violations, how it undermined international institutions to cover up its war crimes, and how it used its global clout to evade all responsibility for its actions. The story needs to be told because had it been any other country, the very same United States of America wouldn't have thought twice before slapping sanctions on them. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. An airstrike that killed civilians in Syria, innocent women and children. What's new, you may ask? American airstrikes have a history of killing the wrong targets, of innocent people. But these airstrikes were kept off the records. These airstrikes were covered up. The US military hid them both at the front line and at the highest level of command. The airstrikes took place on the 18th of March 2019 in the town of Baghouz in eastern Syria. Back then, this town was the last stronghold of the Islamic State. The American military got a tip-off about terrorists hiding among civilians. It was unclear who was a combatant and who wasn't. The military decided to act nonetheless. A classified American Special Operations Unit took up the task. It dropped 2 consecutive bombs on a large group of... Reports say this was despite drone footage showing the presence of civilians in the area. Meaning, they knew there were civilians, but American military commands completely overlooked their presence. They did not issue any warning to the civilians. They just went ahead with the strikes. A total of 80 people were killed, 80 people killed. How many of these were terrorists? 16 apparently. This is according to the US Central Command's findings. It says the bombs killed 16 terrorists and 4 civilians. That adds up to 20. What about the rest? 60 other people died. Who were they? The American military has refused to identify them. It says they could be civilians. According to a New York Times report, analysts sitting at the Air Operations Center in Qatar, the ones which monitor such drone strikes, are said to have acknowledged that most of them were unarmed women and children, yet no investigation was launched. The entire operation was covered up. It was never acknowledged publicly by the US military. One officer tried flagging the strike as a possible war crime. But the US military ensured that all such efforts were concealed. The death toll was downplayed, the blast site was bulldozed, top leaders were not notified, and all reports were either delayed, sanitized, or classified. It was a colossal cover-up. Well, now it's out in the open. Personnel directly involved in the operation are said to have confessed that their leaders were hell-bent on hiding this catastrophe. The question is why? Why did America hide it? Accountability doesn't hurt democracies, it only makes them stronger. Clearly, the American military did not understand this or believe this. It feared that an admission would open a can of worms, put the spotlight on the many civilians that were killed in America's forever wars. It's hard to put a number, but according to a group monitoring America's wars, the US Army has conducted as many as 100,000 airstrikes since 2001. 100,000. Do you know how many civilians have died in these airstrikes? At least 22,000. That's one estimate. Other human rights bodies say the figure could be as high as 48,000. 48,000 civilians killed in American airstrikes in the last 20 years. Does this sound like a stretch to you? Consider the number of US airstrikes that have gone wrong in the last few years, and it might sound like an underestimation. In 2003, when the war on terror officially began, US airstrikes in Iraq killed at least 5,529 civilians. It was the deadliest year for civilian victims of US airstrikes, and it set the precedent for the next 2 decades. America killed civilians and then evaded all responsibility by labeling it as a mistake. That's it, a mistake. I'll give you more examples. 2010, a drone strike in Afghanistan's Uruzgan province killed 23 civilians. The Pentagon responded by, quote-unquote, criticizing the drone crew. Look at the headline on your screen. The Pentagon criticized them, but it did not investigate their actions. How do hollow words help? What's the point of this criticism? Then in 2015, a US airstrike devastated an Afghan hospital run by Doctors Without Borders. It killed 42 civilians. A US military probe refused to call it a war crime. Instead, it labeled it as a mistake caused by a combination of human error and equipment failure. How convenient. It's appalling how casually America dealt with such heinous crimes. For 20 years, it killed people and shrugged. Labeled its crimes as righteous strikes, blamed the killings on human error, and did nothing to bring the culprits to task. And this, by the way, is the country that calls itself the beacon of human rights. How does America get away with all of this? Because the world will not hold it responsible or accountable, and American citizens don't seem to care. According to a Stanford research, almost half of Americans are willing to allow a war crime. They are willing to let a massacre of innocent women and children go unpunished if they believe that the act was committed by soldiers fighting for a just cause. The cause justifies the end. The US military has given itself the moral license to kill innocent people and let its crimes go unprobed and unpunished. And by the way, killing civilians is just one of the many kinds of crimes that they're guilty of. The other is arming rogue regimes and terror outfits, letting its weapons fall into the hands of non-state actors. Look at these images. This is a military parade that the Taliban conducted recently. They flaunted state-of-the-art American and NATO weapons. They have Humvees, helicopters, assault rifles, all thanks to Joe Biden and his team. And of course, the American taxpayers who sponsored these weapons. Let me end this report with a reminder for the United States, and this is something that I've said in the past. When you arm deadly terror outfits, when you kill innocents in the name of wiping out terror, when you cover your war crimes and justify murder in the name of a noble pursuit, you become more dangerous than the terrorists you claim to fight. You become the bigger threat to the world. And speaking of threats, the climate crisis is staring us in the face. So what do? We hold fancy summits. We spend 2 weeks talking, an end in disagreement. That's the COP26 for you in a nutshell. It was expected to be a flop, and it is. After 2 weeks of hard-fought negotiations, the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow has managed to achieve nothing of substance. There was a lot of talk on how to reduce carbon emissions, but when it came to making commitments, world leaders held back. The main goal of the summit was to limit global temperatures, to make sure that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. COP26 was supposed to deliver a deal to reach that goal. It couldn't, which is why we say this summit failed. And when you fail, you need a fall guy. You need someone to pin the blame on. And the same happened in Glasgow. When it was clear that the summit would deliver a weak deal, fingers were pointed at India. Alok Sharma, the president of COP26, said that he was, and I'm quoting, he was deeply frustrated by India and China. Alok Sharma is a British lawmaker. He was responsible for negotiating the final agreement. He delivered a watered-down pact, and he blames India and China for it. Listen to this.
On the issue of coal, China and India, of course, are going to have to justify to some of the most climate vulnerable countries what happened. You heard that disappointment on the floor.
So Sharma gave the cue. Disappointment on the floor, he said. The British press responded. Publications like The Times of the UK ran headlines like the one on your screen. Alok Sharma in tears as India and China dilute pledge to phase out coal. It says Sharma was ambushed by countries like India. What is all of this about? And what is the truth? Let's understand what happened. The pact negotiated at COP26 was called the Glasgow Deal. This deal asked 197 countries to make a very specific commitment. End the use of coal. That's what they wanted. Stop using coal. For the first time ever, there was a push to phase out coal and end fossil fuel subsidies. This was the proposal. Now, India and China opposed this. They asked for a change. They wanted the term phase out to be replaced by phase down, which basically means they will use less coal, but they will not stop using it. The negotiators had to relent. The Glasgow Pact was watered down. Phase out was replaced with phase down. Now, if you read publications like The Times, this is a story about Glasgow that you'll get. This is the only story you'll get, a story that paints the developing world as climate villains. I'm going to tell you the other half of the story. Rich countries are not pulling their weight. They promise to fund the transition to clean fuels, but they're not putting their money where their mouth is. Rich countries drove climate change. Now they want to end it, but they don't want to pay for it. They want the developing world to foot the bill. And that is the crux of the problem. Who will pay the money? Where will the money come from? Rich countries have failed to live up to their promises. And I will show you how. At COP15, in the year 2009, rich countries made a pledge. They promised to provide $100 billion every year to create a climate aid fund of sorts, 100 billion every year, something that would help the world adapt to climate change, that would help other countries transition to cleaner sources of energy. That was the promise 12 years ago. We are in 2021 now, and forget about paying $100 billion every year. Rich countries can't even pay their own share. Every year they fall short. Take the United States, for instance. Going by one estimate, it should be paying 40 to 47 billion of the $100 billion fund. How much does it pay? Between 2016 and 2018, the US contributed around 7.6 billion. 7.6, where it was supposed to pay 40. How do the others fare? By 2018, Australia had paid $1 billion, Canada $1.5 billion, Italy $2.3 billion, the UK $4 billion. Look carefully at this graph. These countries are contributing less than what they're supposed to. Do you know how much India alone needs in climate financing by 2030? $1.5 trillion. That's the kind of investments India needs. What about Africa? $1.3 trillion. Do you see the gap here? The developing world needs trillions of dollars to fight climate change, but rich countries offer $100 billion and don't even pay that. And these are the countries that historically caused climate change. Some of them still remain the biggest emitters. Australia, for instance, it has the highest per capita coal emissions in the world. An average Australian emits 5 times more CO2 from coal than any other person in the world. The United States is close behind. It has the 4th highest coal emissions per capita in the G20. An American emits 3 times more CO2 than the global average. So rich countries emit more CO2 from coal than the rest of the world. They refuse to provide funding and they blame others for watered-down deals. That's climate politics for you. Perhaps Palki Sharma should speak about how disappointing that is. Climate politics and climate justice. Rich countries remain the biggest emitters. They force unrealistic deals on the developing world and deny them the resources they need to transition. Then they blame countries like India for refusing to commit to end the use of coal. Climate politics, climate injustice, and climate hypocrisy. This is what is threatening our planet. Let's focus on India now. The Indian Defence Forces are about to get a major weapons upgrade. 3 years after the deal was signed, Russia has begun delivering the S-400 missile defence system to India. This is a much-needed upgrade necessary to protect Indian skies. The deliveries come just ahead of Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to India next month. And Washington is watching these developments closely. The question is, will America sanction India over the purchase of the S-400? Technically, it has sanctioned other countries. The US has a law to do that. But in India's case, it won't. Our next report tells you why the US cannot afford to sanction India and why the S-400 is critical to India's defense.
India's air defenses are about to get a major boost. Russia has begun delivering the S-400 missile defense system to India. The first deliveries have begun to arrive. Russia is sending some essential parts first. India will get its first unit of the S-400 by the end of the year. The missile defense system has become a necessity for India. Once deployed, the S-400 will be a vital tool to protect Indian skies. It can gun down hostile aircraft, drones, and ballistic and cruise missiles. The S-400 can engage any target within the range of 400 kilometers and an altitude of 30 kilometers. It can simultaneously neutralize 36 targets. These features make the S-400 a potent weapon to protect Indian skies. The Indian Air Force will deploy the first units of this weapon. Reports say the first S-400 will be deployed close to the western borders of India. The Indian forces will choose a strategic location, one that allows them to tackle threats from Pakistan and China together. India has a good reason to speed up this induction. It faces a challenge from both sides of the border. The Pakistan border remains volatile, with terrorists attempting fresh infiltrations into Jammu and Kashmir. On the other side, China has ramped up tensions. The PLA has moved more soldiers and lethal weapons to the line of actual control with India. China too has squadrons of the S-400. It has moved 2 of them to Tibet and near Arunachal Pradesh. India could soon match these deployments with its own S-400 squadrons. The US is watching these developments. It wanted to sell its own defense system to India, the THAAD. But New Delhi chose to go with Moscow. Now it faces the bleak possibility of American sanctions. In 2017, the Americans passed a law called CAATSA. It named Russia as an adversary. The law allows the US government to slap sanctions on allies engaging in major weapons dealings with Moscow. Will America sanction India or give it a waiver? They haven't decided yet. In 2020, the US had sanctioned Turkey for buying the S-400. But India is not Turkey. India is central to America's plan in the region, not to mention a very important market. Washington would think twice before making such a move against New Delhi, because by sanctioning India, the Biden administration won't just anger an ally, it will also strengthen China, one of its biggest adversaries. Bureau Report, World is One.
Let's stick with China. A few weeks back, about a major sex scandal in China. Peng Shuai, one of China's biggest tennis stars, had made a big revelation. She'd accused a former Chinese vice premier of sexual assault. Peng said that Zhang Gaoli, the former vice premier, had coerced her into sex. And this was a bombshell because never before had we heard of a senior Communist Party official being publicly accused of sexual assault. Almost immediately, China's firewall kicked into action. All references to the story were being scrubbed from the internet. The Communist Party is hitting back. Peng Shuai, the tennis star, has apparently gone missing. It's been 10 days. No one has heard from her. Earlier, her Weibo account was hidden by the Chinese censors. Now, Peng herself has gone missing from the public eye. The tennis world is asking questions and raising concerns. The World Tennis Association has issued a statement. I have a copy of it, and this is what it says. The recent events in China concerning a WTA player, Peng Shuai, are of deep concern. Peng Shuai and all women deserve to be heard, not censored. Her accusation about the conduct of a former Chinese leader involving a sexual assault must be treated with utmost seriousness. We expect this issue to be handled properly, meaning the allegations must be investigated fully, fairly, transparently, and without censorship. This was a statement from Steve Simon, the WTA chairman and CEO, World Tennis Association. He was later asked about the whereabouts of Peng. Simon said he had received information from several sources, and they said that Peng was quote-unquote safe and not under any physical threat. But Steve Simon does not seem to believe that. He said no one involved with the WTA tour had been able to reach Peng. If she's safe and sound, why can't they contact her? He believed the tennis star was in Beijing, but they can't confirm it. The WTA says it won't back off from its strong position against China. They want assurances about Peng's well-being. And other tennis players have spoken. They've expressed similar concerns. A hashtag is now gaining traction. Where is Peng Shuai? Both tennis players and fans have been using this hashtag to raise their voices. Where is Peng Shuai? And I have some reactions for you. This one is from Chris Evert. She's a former world #1 herself. And this is what she says. Yes, these accusations are very disturbing. I've known Peng since she was 14. We should all be concerned. This is serious. Where is she? Is she safe? Any information would be appreciated. American tennis legend Martina Navratilova put out a statement too. She shared the WTA statement, and this is what she said. A very strong stance by WTA and the correct stance. Here's another one from Elise Cornet. She's a French tennis player, and this is what she says. Let's not remain silent. Hashtag where is Peng Shuai? Another tennis player, Liam Brody, has said this. I can't believe this is even happening in the 21st century. Hashtag where is Peng Shuai? The fact that Peng Shuai is missing is not only the WTA's problem. We are all concerned. This is from Nicholas Mahut, a former world #1 in doubles. I could share many more tweets with you. The Chinese may not seem to notice them because Twitter is banned from the mainland, but it's unlikely that the Chinese state will ignore them or can ignore them. The scandal came to light almost 2 weeks back when we reported it. Beijing is still silent about the allegations. And it is making sure that Peng Shuai and her supporters remain silent too. Any mention of the former vice premier Zhang Gaoli has been wiped off the internet in China. Peng's post about him has been removed, the one where she talked about the sexual assault. Reposts are not allowed, and comments on Peng Shuai's Weibo account remain disabled. People cannot comment on her story. China is using censorship to contain the scandal, scrub it off from public memory. The entire state machinery has been deployed to silence one woman and to save a former vice premier from what is becoming the biggest Me Too scandal in China. The reaction from the World Tennis Association is a welcome step. It builds pressure on Beijing. The message from the tennis world is quite clear. They will not stop the scrutiny of the Communist Party. And we too won't stop asking the questions until Peng Shuai is safe. Well, we can tell you someone who may not ask this question when he speaks to Xi Jinping. We don't expect Joe Biden, the US president, to bring up this story tomorrow. He'll talk with the Chinese president virtually. I don't think this is on the agenda, unfortunately. Their first such interaction will take place on Tuesday. They're not calling it a summit, they're calling it just a meeting. And that's called expectation management. A summit sounds grand, you see. A meeting sounds more routine, manageable. So this is a meeting. It begins at 6:30 a.m. IST Tuesday. You see, in diplomacy, terminology is crucial. A summit has a pre-arranged agenda. A meeting, not so much. And I'm sure there is an agenda. They will go with a plan. They just don't want to disclose it. They don't have to disclose it. So they're keeping it vague. Look at the White House statement. It says Joe Biden will virtually meet Xi Jinping to discuss ways to compete responsibly, besides finding ways to work together where their interests align. Like I said, vague. The Chinese Foreign Ministry too has issued a detail-free confirmation of the meeting in a one-sentence statement. This is what it says. The two leaders will meet to exchange views on US-China relations and issues of mutual interest. That's it. Both sides are tight-lipped about what to expect. They've limited the focus to finding common ground, but sources familiar with the negotiations have revealed some interesting details about what could unfold at the meeting. For starters, they will talk about cybersecurity, trade and nuclear non-proliferation, none of which is surprising. What about the issues that they will not talk about? The ones that could potentially derail the meeting. That list is longer, like human rights violations in Tibet, China's choking of Hong Kong, the genocide of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Reports say that Joe Biden is not expected to raise any of this with Xi Jinping. And even if he does, he will rely on less inflammatory references, which is a pity. What's the point of the conversation if you're going to sidestep the most important subjects, assuming that human rights are important to the Biden administration? And then we have Tibet and Taiwan. Taiwan, of course, is extremely sensitive. Right now, one of the biggest points of contention between the US and China. Beijing regards Taiwan as a renegade province. China is clear that Taiwan should be reunified with the mainland, and it is prepared to use force if needed. The US, on the other hand, is trying to ensure that democracy prevails in Taiwan. It has even promised to defend Taipei in case of an invasion, a Chinese invasion. So Taiwan will come up in the virtual talks. Chinese officials say Xi Jinping warned Joe Biden to quote-unquote step back on the Taiwan issue and abide by its long-standing one China policy. The question is, will Biden agree? America considers Taiwan its most useful leverage against Beijing. And this was evident in a recent phone call. This was between the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi over the weekend. Blinken dialed Wang Yi to discuss the upcoming bilateral meeting. And according to the US State Department, during this phone call, Blinken is said to have emphasized, and I'm quoting, the long-standing US interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. He's also said to have expressed concern regarding the PRC, People's Republic of China's continued military, diplomatic and economic pressure against Taiwan. To put it simply, America may not concede on Taiwan and China will not relent. So the presidents will talk. We don't expect a breakthrough. We'll keep you posted on how the conversation goes. For the moment, we are turning to Saudi Arabia, a country that for years has been known for its ultra-conservative nature. Women here had very few rights and freedoms. But the kingdom is now opening up. Women can drive at long last. They can travel alone. And now they can even play football. Saudi Arabia has launched its very first women's football league. The federation calls it an important moment for the sport. It is indeed very significant, but will it bring real change for the women in the kingdom? Here's a report.
The House of Saud. It is a name synonymous to Saudi Arabia. The royal family makes the rules for the desert kingdom. For years, women here have lived under strict rules. Rules dictated by the old guard. But then came Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The de facto ruler had a vision, a mission to convince the world that the ultra-conservative kingdom was on a new path. Women were suddenly allowed to drive. They could attend sporting events, travel without a man's permission, and even live alone. A thought that was unimaginable a few years ago. Now, Riyadh has launched a football league. The first edition of a women's league in the kingdom. It is a move to support women's football. Part of a program set up by the Saudi Arabia Football Federation, the new league will be played in 2 phases. 16 teams playing in 3 of its biggest cities. Those who qualify play in a knockout competition. One that will be held in the Red Sea city of Jeddah. But not just football. Women here are making strides in various sports like cycling and shooting. For years, Samar Rahbini thought it was impossible to cycle on the streets of Saudi Arabia. Things have changed. There are still some glares and bewilderment, but ignoring them is easier now.
صراحة قبل 2017 الوضع كان جدا صعب يعني بسبب يعني عدم تقبل المجتمع للرياضة النسائية بشكل عام وخاصة رياضة ممارسة ركوب الدراجات الهوائية كان يعني صراحة غير مقبول المجتمع كان غير قابل الوضع كان
Mona Al-Quraish has had a similar experience. 5 years ago, she turned her passion into her profession. The 36-year-old now teaches shooting in Riyadh. But this is not without its own set of problems. Saudi Arabia may have new rights for women. But when it comes to mindsets, the divide remains. It is difficult to gauge how Saudis view these changes. The reforms have made international headlines. But Saudi Arabia has a long way to go. Women still need the permission of a male guardian to marry, start businesses, or even leave prison. Men continue to have the grip on power here. There are no women in King Salman's cabinet, no women in senior advisory roles. The Crown Prince's 2030 vision is that of a new Saudi Arabia. One that is economically diverse and more tolerant. Riyadh wants to diversify its economy away from oil and attract more investors and tourists. But a real image makeover will take a lot more. It will need the changing of mindsets, a reform of the old guard. So while winds of change may be blowing here, as the dust settles, will it leave behind any real reforms? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And I'll talk about what's happening in the Philippines. A father-daughter duo is competing for the same post in order to ensure that the family maintains its grip on governance. It's a very interesting story. It tells you how prevalent dynasty politics is in the country. Still is. The duo in question are Rodrigo Duterte, the strongman president of the Philippines, and his daughter Sara Duterte, the controller of Davao, the largest city in the country. Both are running for vice president, in the hope that one of them will make it. Rodrigo Duterte, as some of you might be aware, is a president who rules with an iron fist. He has a one-size-fits-all approach towards governance. More military, more crackdown, less discussion. That's his approach, basically. He has ruled like this for the last 5 years and consolidated power in the country's politics. Next year, the Philippines heads to polls. And unfortunately, its 76-year-old president is ineligible for re-election. The Constitution of the Philippines does not allow it. Presidents cannot seek a second term in the Philippines. But presidents can still contest for other posts. So Duterte plans to run for vice president. On Monday afternoon, he filed his certificate for vice presidency. But his prospects don't look too bright. He's currently a leader in disgrace. Filipinos are fed up with his draconian policies, especially with his controversial war on drugs, which has led to the killing of 5,100 people, drug consumers and smugglers, but the citizens of Philippines nonetheless. The International Criminal Court wants to investigate him for what is being called extrajudicial killings. It's quite uncertain if Duterte will be able to win. So his daughter has come to his rescue. She too plans to contest for the same post, vice presidency of the country. Secure the post in case her father doesn't. Her name is Sara Duterte, 43 years old, mayor of Davao City. The first woman ever to hold this post. She's quite a popular figure in the country. She has an image quite similar to her father's, infamous for getting into fist fights. She once punched a court official who challenged her. She also loves big motorbikes. She once campaigned for elections on a bike complete with a leather jacket. She traveled from one province to another to build support for her bid to mayorship. Here's an interesting fact about her. The names of her children are Sharky, Stingray and Stonefish. She likes the ocean a lot, clearly. The feisty politician will now run for vice president. She's contesting from a new political party headed by former president Gloria Arroyo. And interestingly, Sara Duterte has been picked as the running mate of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the late Filipino dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos Jr. is running for president. Duterte Jr. is running for vice president. And so is Duterte Sr. The elections next year are going to be a big, fat family affair. But the Marcos and Dutertes are by far the strongest political dynasties in the Philippines. The Marcos family stronghold stretches across the country's north and center. The Dutertes enjoy widespread support in the south. They now plan to join forces, fuse their influence, and rule the Philippines for the next 6 years. That is the plan. If they win, their power is going to be absolute. And you know what they say about absolute power? It corrupts. Absolutely. Philippines is heading in for some interesting times. We'll keep track. Here's a question. Are you a fan of sci-fi movies? If you are, you must know that what the end of the world looks like. Robots taking over the world and ruling over us. But does the future truly belong to machines? It's a question that we've often asked and no one has been able to effectively, convincingly answer. But here's something that's happening around us. This year, a record number of robots were sold in the US. What for? They were filling up jobs affected by the labor shortage in the country. More and more companies are turning to robots because they can't find people to do those jobs. So the big question here is, are robots really coming for our jobs, and what kind of jobs? Here's a report.
The Terminator, The Matrix, RoboCop. What do all these movies have in common? Killer robots who want to rule the world. Hollywood wants us to believe that robots, good or evil, are the future. But how much truth is there in that? It is the era of the rise of the machines. They are landing up in workplaces, flipping burgers, writing thank you letters, and even watching over humans. Currently, it is holiday season in America. Companies are scrambling to deliver orders. There is a labor shortage across the country. Hiring workers has become a struggle. So, who is replacing these laborers? Robots. The shortage has been a boon for robot sales. Robotic orders by North American companies are on track for their biggest year. Till September this year, robotic sales were worth $1.48 billion. Companies are turning to robots to stay productive, amid labor shortages across all sectors. Firms have ordered nearly 29,000 robotics units in the first 9 months of 2021. This is a 37% increase from 2020. Companies of all sizes are ordering them to power through the holiday season. Does this mean robots are taking over the world? What companies are aiming for is efficiency and fulfilling demands ahead of a busy season. Even with the acute labor shortage, businesses need to continue operating. So turning to robots could be a temporary solution here. For those who fear a robot revolution, the truth is that it is already here. Think self-driving cars, drones, chatbot. Automation is the name of the game. So does that mean less jobs for humans? In some sectors, yes. These are jobs that robots can do better and more efficiently. But the fact is, the evolution of robots comes with the evolution of industries. As robots take over some jobs, more jobs are made, often to look over them. Job opportunities evolve with any new invention, and this one is no different. As for other sectors like education and health, there is no replacement for human expertise. No amount of artificial intelligence will be able to replace some qualitative human traits. For years, movies sold two ideas about robots. Either they are destroying the human race, or they are friendly, helping us get by. But the future is a little more nuanced than that. Robots are taking over some of our jobs, but they are also making a shift in labor. One that brings together humans and machines. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
Major Ross Martin of the Irish Guards leading the way.